Hey there. So, picture this. It's the peak of the Cold War. The year is 1959, and deep beneath the endless, frozen surface of Greenland, a place so remote and hostile it might as well be the moon, a young U.S. Army engineer is threading a light bulb into a socket. He gives it a twist, and with a soft click, the bulb illuminates a city. A secret, functioning city of tunnels and buildings, carved into the ice itself. A place that, according to every map and every public record, does not exist. For a moment, he stands there in that electric glow, surrounded by walls of ancient, compacted snow. And he thinks to himself, what on earth have we built? Welcome back. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is the Curiosity Compendium. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious, secretive, and ultimately surreal military engineering projects of the 20th century. This is the story of Project Iceworm, the U.S. Army's clandestine plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles under the Greenland ice sheet and the forgotten city it left behind. To understand why anyone would try to build a missile base inside a glacier, you have to feel the geopolitical chill of the late 1950s. The Soviet Union was a continent away, over the North Pole. Greenland, a territory of Denmark, was the perfect strategic midpoint. The U.S. needed a way to position nuclear missiles within striking distance of the USSR, but doing it openly would be a massive provocation. So, they came up with a cover story. A public, peaceful, scientific research project called Camp Century. They told the world, and even the Danish government, that it was a polar science station. And that was true on the surface. But buried within that truth was Iceworm. The engineering itself was pure science fiction. They couldn't just dig into the ice, it would flow and collapse. So, they used something called a trenching machine, a massive snowblower on steroids, to carve out enormous trenches. Over these trenches, they built arched steel roofs, and then buried the entire complex under more snow, creating a self-contained, hidden network. And I mean a network. There were over 2 miles of tunnels. There was a hospital, a shop, a theater, a chapel, even a barber shop, all powered by a portable nuclear reactor. At its peak, over 200 soldiers and scientists lived there, in this humming, fluorescent-lit world under the ice. They had movies every night. They published their own newspaper. They celebrated Christmas, all while the ice, this living, shifting entity, groaned and pressed in on their walls every single day. And that right there is the central, beautiful irony of Camp Century. The public face, the science, was genuinely groundbreaking. The ice cores they drilled there revolutionized our understanding of Earth's climate history. They were doing real, important work. But the soldiers walking those tunnels knew the other purpose. They were mapping, planning, and testing for Iceworm, a proposed system that would have been 52 times larger, with thousands of miles of tunnels and launch sites for 600 nuclear missiles. A hidden, moving fortress, because the ice sheet itself is in constant, slow motion. The plan was to constantly maintain and extend the tunnels, a perpetual game of architectural catch-up with the glacier. It was a scheme of staggering scale and complexity, born from a unique moment of human fear and ingenuity. But the ice, as it turns out, is a relentless landlord. The engineers of the 1950s believed the snowfall in that region was stable, that the glacier was relatively static. They were wrong. The ice sheet was far more dynamic. The tunnels began to deform and collapse almost as soon as they were built. The constant pressure of the flowing ice was winning. By 1966, just 7 years after that first light bulb was screwed in, the project was no longer viable. The reactor was removed. Camp Century was abandoned. Everything of value was taken out, and the entrance tunnels were sealed, leaving the city to be slowly crushed and swallowed by the very ice it was built to conquer. Project Iceworm was dead, buried by geology. And that's where the story used to end. A secret project fails, it's left to the elements. It becomes a curious footnote in Cold War history. But in the 21st century, the story of Camp Century took on a new and profoundly unsettling second life. You see, when they left, they couldn't remove everything. They left behind the entire physical infrastructure, the buildings, the railways, the sewage. And they left behind the biological and chemical waste, including a substantial amount of radioactive coolant from that nuclear reactor. The assumption, the calculation, was that all of this would be entombed forever under perpetual snowfall, locked away in a deep freeze for eternity. Climate change has rewritten that calculation. Recent climate models now show that the area where Camp Century is buried could begin to experience net surface melt by the end of this century. As the ice sheet melts from above, the shifting layers could mobilize those long-forgotten wastes, potentially releasing them into the local environment. The very strategy of using geology as a permanent waste repository was flawed, because the geology wasn't as permanent as they thought. So a project born from one kind of global threat, nuclear war, has now resurfaced as a problem created by another, climate change. It's a stark lesson in unintended consequences, and in the hubris of assuming our solutions are forever. Whenever I read about projects like this, as an engineer myself, I'm caught between two feelings. The first is sheer awe at the human ingenuity on display. The problem-solving, the logistics, the sheer will to make something function in an environment that is fundamentally hostile to human life. It's breathtaking. But the second feeling is a deep, sobering humility. We built a city under ice. We lit it up. We lived in it. And we were utterly confident in our models. But we failed to fully understand the system we were building in. The ice was more alive, more fluid than we knew. And the future climate was more fragile than we imagined. That's the real takeaway from Project Iceworm for me. It's not just a wild Cold War tale. It's a parable about the limits of our foresight. We are incredible builders, but we are not always the best long-term custodians. We see a problem, we engineer a brilliant, complex solution, but we can miss the second-order effects, the slow-moving variables, the changes that happen on a timeline longer than our political or even our scientific cycles. Camp Century was a monument to what we can achieve. Its slow-motion reemergence is a monument to what we forget to consider. So the next time you see a map of the world, glance up at Greenland. Beneath that vast white expanse, under hundreds of feet of accumulated snow and time, lies the ghost of a city. A testament to a secret war that never happened, and a quiet warning, frozen in melt, for the challenges we face today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Curiosity Compendium. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please share it with a curious friend. It helps more people discover the show. For more stories from the edges of history, science, and human endeavor, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This is Ibnul J. Farabi for Light Not Studios. Stay curious.